Catchment Combos with Thriving Southland, your link to Southland catchment groups and their impactful projects. Each episode will dive into grassroots effort by local farmers and communities that are driving change and sustainability in our regions. Listen in for inspiring stories and insight. Real people, real change, the Southland way.
Welcome back to Catchment Combos. My name is Sarah Thorne and I'm your host today. I am a catchment coordinator with Thriving Southland and have the wonderful job of working with Southland's catchment groups. I started back in 2017 with the New Zealand Landcare Trust, and in 2020 I was part of the local team who helped set up Thriving Southland, and I've been part of the Thriving Southland team ever since. In today's episode, we're exploring all things Thriving Southland, what we do and how it works. Thriving Southland just turned 5 years old, and yes, we did have birthday cakes at lots of catchment group meetings and events. And during our work, we get asked a lot of questions about what we do, how it works, and why Thriving Southland is special. And we thought it was about time we did a podcast on it. Today, I'm joined by Richard Kyte, Thriving Southland's project lead, who played a huge part in bringing the idea of catchment groups to Southland and has supported them ever since. Richard spent 7 years as the regional lead of Dairy NZ in Southland and was a key force in setting up Thriving Southland. And we also have my lovely fellow catchment coordinator, Tessa Miller, with us too. Tessa is a Southlander and a farmer. She's worked with our catchment groups for many years, starting out as an environmental graduate with Dairy NZ, and moving to Lampro, and finally taking up the role of Mataro catchment coordinator. Together, we're going to cover all things Thriving Southland, what Thriving Southland does, how it's set up, and why it works so well. So let's get into it. Welcome, Tessa and Richard. So, to help set the scene for our listeners today, Tessa, could you tell us a bit about our team and how it's set up and works?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, for having me on the podcast. It's really exciting to work for Thriving Southland, and I'm actually really proud to be a part of the team. Essentially, the way I put Thriving Southland is that it's a platform to help farmers work together around supporting community action. We support whatever the catchment groups are interested in, but essentially we're the facilitators to share knowledge, help farmers access funding and get some real change happening within the catchments. And so the team that supports catchment groups, we have 5 catchment group coordinators and we have 3 fabulous office-based staff. Our coordinators each manage a different patch. So there's 4 freshwater management units within Southland and we have 5 coordinators across those. And so it makes sense that our catchment coordinators actually live in those communities as well.
Just to back up what Tessa has said, I think that the key thing about Thriving Southland, and I know there's catchment groups that run the same way throughout the country, but one of our core principles is actually, we're ground up driven. What we say with our catchment groups is they all own the projects they're running because it's the stuff they want to do and the stuff they're focused on. And Thriving's role is to actually support that, to find them the science, the information, the right people to actually give legs to their projects. So the key challenge is always finding funding for the core work, which is supporting work on the ground. We're a real ground-up based model. That, to me, that's the fundamental part of Thriving, and then the ability to support them, which is obviously the catchment coordinators. Because there's 37 groups, basically we're a farmer-run organisation. We've got a farmer board, and I think that's what makes us quite different. The way we run is really core to the success that, I say we've had, but the catchment groups have had.
And I think the point you made that everything's ground up, isn't it? All our work comes from our groups. We listen to our groups. You summarised it beautifully between you that we've got a team of coordinators and an office-based team. We all work together really closely. Richard, you mentioned funding there. Could you tell us a little bit about how our funding works and how it helps the catchment groups and they can access it?
Yep, we're supported by MPI and they've been really good around understanding the way we operate. We have good financial systems to give them the confidence around putting the funds in and knowing that the catchment groups are getting what they want and they're going to deliver. We've also funding from other areas. Currently, we're working with Environment Southland, looking at funding for wetlands. And also some of the extension work we do. The key to it is the organisations we work with who fund us, they understand it's ground up. They understand that the farmers lead the way. So it's a bit of what the groups are doing builds the confidence, that builds the ability to fund. And I think, again, it comes back to the way we're structured, but also the way the catchment groups actually have been delivering outcomes. Yeah.
To add to what Richard has said, from a catchment group point of view, it's actually really exciting that we as catchment group coordinators can support that funding in a really easy, streamlined way. If we have a catchment group that comes to us and says, hey, we've got this challenge down here, it's really cool to be able to go, what does that look like as a catchment scale? We've got a super easy form that we can help the catchment group to fill in, but it's the farmers that take responsibility and they're the ones that sign the funding agreement.
And I think another thing to add is the projects. We also have an independent project panel. We have a group that sit and look at projects and actually pull them apart quite rigorously. That independent panel is really important. So there's a outside view of what's happening and what's being done.
So you guys have mentioned some projects there. Do you have any that really stood out for you that you absolutely loved and thought, wow, I'd love to share that?
It's probably not one. I'm not trying to get out of naming and being biased, but I suppose what I've found fascinating is watching groups maybe start with water quality and then taking on the understanding around protocols and water quality testing. Then from that, they're finding what they know aligns with what the water quality testing is telling them. And then they're saying, well, what are the solutions to this? And now we're seeing groups that are actually moving quite quickly around. We know what we're working with now. We know what we have to focus on. Actually watching groups follow the trail of the science. The Macquarie Headwaters group, that's just one example where they were talking about mitigations on farm first, and they're looking at the headwaters water quality, and that led them to understand their key challenge was ungulates in the native bush. So they're saying this is where we need to start to actually get the outcomes that we want. So yeah, watching groups following the science, that's what really excites me about the work of catchment groups and the communities, because I think, as somebody said to me, you throw them the ball, they pick it up and run and leave you behind.
And one other saying that Richard has is to go slow to go fast. We see that all the time, that catchment groups start with something really, really small, but cumulatively, you wait a month or two and it flies. We're busy supporting these guys, and like Richard said, really cool to watch them actually follow the science.
I think you've just touched on a really cool point, Tess. I mean, being a catchment coordinator is a fun job, and I think you've got to be a bit of a jack of all trades as well. Can you tell me a bit about what a typical work week or even a work day is that possible? Looks like for you, probably also different.
Yeah, absolutely. We are so different. Each of us support between 6 and 12 groups. From a day-to-day point of view, it essentially looks like, how do we connect with the people that matter to the catchment group, whether that's your farmer leaders, whether that is industry groups or specialists that people want to hear from. And another core thing is that we actually try and keep up with what's happening around the space so that we can bring ideas to the catchment groups themselves. As anyone knows who's a part of a catchment group, a lot of our meetings are actually at night time, which, your day does look a wee bit different than a normal 9 to 5. But when I come home from meetings, you feel supercharged. People turn up and they've talked about something really positive and local for their community for the last 2 hours, and they've made some headway. They've got a funding plan or they've got an extension plan. They know where they're going to go. They know how they're going to share their learnings. And it's a brilliant place to be. I don't think that answers your what does a day-to-day look like, but that's the basis of what we do.
I think you made so many wonderful points there, Tessa, and catchment groups have really brought communities together again. Now, Richard, what about you? You're in the office, you're at catchment group meetings, and you're out and about.
I think the work in a community, you really don't know what's going to pop up. And I think that's what makes it a really enjoyable role. I think one part of my role that I enjoy, and you'd be quite surprised, like the number of organisations now that actually that are really wanting to engage with the catchment groups. So there's a lot of interest now in the work, even nationally, being done by catchment groups because it's about applying the science around solutions to challenges. I think there's a lot that the organisations are learning from catchment groups and the way they approach their challenges. So my role is, say, looking at funding, but also going and catching up with organisations who want to engage with groups. And again, it's ground up and they look at me sideways when I first say, well, actually, we'll have to go and ask the catchment group if they're interested in what you're doing. So it's great to be helping that flow between the science organisations and the stakeholders and the groups themselves.
I think you touched on it before, but we're now 5 years old and we've covered a huge amount of ground. I think we're up to 882 events, over 12,000 attendees, and more than 150 projects. But there have been challenges on the way, and I think it's important to talk about that too. Would either of you feel comfortable sharing some of your challenges?
Yeah, I think one of the key challenges we have as, as community, we've all got different views and different ideas. And so I think the ability to actually pull a whole group of people together, sit down, allow everybody to be heard and watch people start working together, that's a challenging space. And you throw in some science and it becomes more challenging. And you throw in the day-to-day stuff. We've just seen that in Southland with the massive wind events and the challenging springs. And yet, in amongst all that, we still see the catchment groups achieving great things with their projects and the work they're doing. So, yeah, the challenges around community and people's time and agreement, that's a big space. And yet out of that, we get results, which is, I shouldn't say it's surprising, but it's actually really pleasing to see, it's having trust in your community. I think that's a key takeaway for me from all the projects we've done, because they're all a bit like that.
To add to what Richard has said, we are so lucky within Thriving Southland around how our funding is set up and how quickly we actually are able to get funding out the door. But with catchment groups, you are working with community and you are working to deadlines, and trying to get them all to come to a decision in a timely fashion is, it's a bit of fun. One of the groups that really showcased that with me was the Edendale Aquifer Group. Essentially, they came up with a huge project very quickly that was around how do they understand nitrogen moving through their catchment. They were meeting almost weekly to try and pull together all the different threads of this huge project. But the way that they managed it was actually to say, hey, look, we can gather as much science as we can, but we actually don't know what that result is going to be until we see the science for ourselves as farmers in the catchment. And so they put together what was called a stop-go into their funding plan. They have only recently reached that stop-go point. They've got a whole bunch of information that now means that they understand their catchment. And now they can take those learnings to what does that actually mean for us? How do we want to share this information wider? Can we put in some capital work? Can we put in wetlands along the terrace? Whatever that might look like for them. But it's been really interesting to watch how they formed from such a big challenge and so many views in the groups to being quite cohesive around what they're trying to achieve.
Well, they have a fabulous group, Tessa. They've done so much so quickly. Now, I know this is putting you guys on the spot a wee bit, but do you have a favourite project or event?
I think that is a tough one, Sarah, because all the catchment groups are different and they all focus on their own, unique ideas. When I think about the event that I had the greatest feeling walking away from, that's probably the easiest way to answer the question. The Waikawa catchment group, they had this idea around needing to understand their landscape. They're having a lot of issues with flooding in the Waikawa River and the flooding taking out fences and going over productive paddocks and wiping up bridges and culverts and all these kinds of things. And so their project they wanted to develop was how do we slow the flow of the Waikawa River? They are such a fantastic community and they all have huge trust in each other, and they chose to come together. It was the first beautiful day after the horrible wet spring that we had had, and everyone should have been in the tractor. But instead, about 20 of the farmers chose to come to the hall, and they sat there for, I would say, almost 4 hours. Each of them who came had come with their own project that was on their own farm, and they had put in the work to say just what the description of the project actually was, how it was going to reduce how much water was coming down, what other benefits it might have, what had they already done on their farm that worked or didn't work. And it was the most incredible feeling to sit there and watch all of these farmers put these projects up onto the big screen, and they literally mapped the catchment of projects that they wanted to do that was going to make a difference. And then I had to take all that home and work out who on earth was going to go forward for the funding and what on earth we were going to do. But now we've got this incredible database of farmers who are actively trying to improve their local environment. For me, that was just the most special event.
That's so beautiful, Tessa. Richard, that's going to be a tough one to top. Do you think you can?
Oh, yeah. Well, Tessa was talking, I was actually thinking as well that we must mention all the support from consultants that actually come in and get alongside these projects. So it's not just thriving. We are not the scientists, we're not the specialists, but we are about coordinating. For me, I really enjoyed the amount of people that actually get engaged with our groups and help to drive what we're doing. But I just thought I didn't want to pick one project because I think they're all different. It sounds like a get out of jail free. But they're all different and they all bring different ways of working, which we all learn from as well. And we spread that amongst the groups. But I suppose if you're thinking about one project that I really did enjoy, which is Agritech, and that came from the Gore Catchment Group. And the coordinator said, actually, I've had conversations with farmers about tech as well. Then that grew, and Tanya, one of our coordinators, she got the bit between the teeth, and then we basically rang all the lead people in the agritech and the technology space, and they all turned up. We've run it 2 years now, and the weather, freezing cold, and I remember sitting there, but actually what amazed me was at the end of the day, the farmers were still there, even though it was cold. That was delivering, that was listening to farmers around. They want technology that they can actually use. They want to hear farmers talking about technology that they're using, and then watching the technology businesses get on board and support it. It was a really big event for a really small team. And I was just blown away by what the team delivered. That for me was a fun event, but it also was a positive event. And I think that's the key to catchment groups. They're about a positive way forward and positive ways of finding solutions for challenges.
I think you did very well, Richard. Okay, so looking to the future, is there anything in the pipeline that you're super excited about that you'd like to share with us today?
I suppose what I'm excited about, our core funding has been for science and extension. And when we first started, I thought that's a real challenge because it wasn't about being able to plant or use that funding to put money on the ground. But actually, I think it was the best thing that ever happened because we can now see communities with plenty of science, plenty of understanding about the challenges. And I'm really excited about what they're starting to do with that science. And it's a long-term project. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But watching the change once the information's there, that's what's exciting me about the future. And I think the fact that we've got groups across Southland, basically the region of Southland has got positive work.
Tessa, do you have anything to add?
I think what I'm excited about is how catchment groups will continue to develop and grow. Within Thriving Southland, we often talk about how we've got the ebbs and flows of catchment groups. Some groups are working hard and have big projects. They need to have a bit of a lull phase, relax a little bit and, gather their strength again. And it gives space for another group to open up. I just can't wait to see what projects they start to pull out and learning from other groups, both in Southland, but nationally as well, and even internationally. And then trying to link that with what's actually happening on farm. And so I think that catchment groups are just such an incredible way of sharing information, trialing new things, it doesn't really matter what it is, but how do we support you to have a better farming business? And like Richard said, it's a really positive way forward around finding solutions for a challenge.
I do too, Tessa, and that's a really beautiful ending to our podcast today. So thank you so much, Tessa and Richard, for joining me today. I think our local catchment groups have a very long and healthy future ahead with people like you supporting them. And a massive thanks to all the stakeholders, scientists, and consultants that also stretch around and support the Southland catchment groups. And I think our final thanks should be to the amazing people that turn up to the events and the catch groups and the meetings, because you make it so worthwhile and they're doing fantastic change across Southland.
And that's a wrap for another episode of Catchment Combos, brought to you by Thriving Southland. A big thanks to our guests for being a part of the conversation on today's episode, and for you guys for tuning in. We appreciate your support. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you get your podcast from, so you can stay up to date with all the latest episodes as they're released. For more information on this episode, check out the show notes or head to the Thriving Southland website, where you can also learn more about the awesome work happening across the catchment groups here in Southland. And if you've got a project or an idea you want to share, don't be shy, reach out. So until next time, keep up the good work out there on the land, and as always, stay connected and keep driving those changes for a thriving Southland.